What's up YouTube, photoshoot here. And we got another deck profile. Last month we had the arguably the best deck of this format with Tango Plants, and I decided to change it a little bit this month because we're now profiling a roguelike deck in the form of Rock Monarchs. This format is probably the last format for Frog Monarch, where you could play it semi-competitive and get maybe a top if you have a lucky day. Besides that, this deck was pretty good in the National season of 2010 and in Edison, with cards like Substitute and of course Rock Frog being there also. With the release of Ronin Toad, this deck got a bit of a boost, but the release of Ronin Toad was probably even more important for the Frog FTK deck. 2011, as I said, was the last format where this deck could be played as a decent rogue option on tournaments until 2016, where the Monarch structure deck was released. But in my opinion, the 2016 Monarch deck had absolutely nothing to do with the deck I'm going to profile, because if you look at the new Monarch deck, then you're going to see absolutely no cards besides maybe Vanity's Fiend as a side deck option were played in the 2016 Monarch deck, which is quite obvious because this deck was even power creeped in this format. So without further ado, let's get to the deck profile. Now, let's get to the deck profile. First, we start with 3 Swap Frogs. This is an absolute no-brainer. It's part of a Frog engine. We really need to get a 3-bone Frog into a graveyard, otherwise this deck loses a lot of power and reliant tribute fodder. So we have to max out on those. Then we also run double 3-bone Frog. The list that's topped Wisest Toronto actually main decked 3 3-bone Frogs, but I don't think that's really necessary. In 2014 you had to kind of run 3 3-bone Frog thanks to Rhapsody, but I think the only card that could be threatening for 3-bone Frog besides Trishula is DD Crow, and it's not very optimal to side take more than one DD Crow. So by running 3, you risk to get Rainbow Dead Draws or more inconsistent hands, so I think 2 is enough. The only thing where you have to be careful is when your opponent summons Trishula. So when you get both access to both 3-bone Frogs, you should not summon you should not summon 3-bone Frog without getting it off the board, because otherwise your opponent could resolve the Trishula and banish both 3-bone Frogs, which would be very bad. And then we run, of course, 1 copy of Ronin Toad. It's more tribute, it's more tribute fodder, and of course it gives us access to all rank 2s, or only rank 2, which I'm going to show later. Then for the Monarchs, 3 Chaos, which is an incredible card in this format, especially in decks like Plants, or even Dimensional Alchemist Chaos. So this should say a lot about this card when it's because it's not only getting used in a Monarch deck, then Playraiser, which is the second best Monarch, and compared to Chaos, way better in the late game, where it becomes relevant to spin dead cards of your opponent's deck. It also deals with any kind of extra deck monster. So we run those. Then 2 Cups of Light and Darkness Dragon. This card is kind of interesting. because it's probably not that strong like it was in Perfect Circle format, where you had access to like to cards like Disc Commander. But I think it's still the best tribute monster that you could play, which requires 2 tributes, especially if you have plays like Enemy Controller or with Tribond Frog, where you instantly get 2 tributes and prevent your opponent for trishing or even use a chaos. So this card has a lot of use. It's a bit overrated in my opinion, but in this deck, I think it still has its spot. And if this card gives your opponent, forces your opponent to use at least 2 cards, that's already fine for me. So we run 2 copies. The Toronto list actually ran 3, but I think 3 is way too much. You sometimes have, even with this deck, the problem that your hand gets clogged with way too much tribute monsters. So to prevent that, we run a bit less. I think the Toronto list ran 13 or 14 tribute monsters, and this runs only 10. Then we play 2 one-offs. First Vanity's Fiend, which is incredible against Plant and Agent, and kills a lot of special summon land decks, and of course the Deductor Spirit, which could clear some kind of boards. I think the card is a bit better in March 2011 format, where you have a deck like 6 Samurai, where the effect is, unless they have Musakani, could be devastating to a big Samurai board, but I think it's still fine as a one-off. That's the good thing about this deck. You can play some specific tribute monsters for certain matchups. Jinzu might be an option, but I think this is better as a side deck card. I'm not the biggest fan of Tester Loss, because this deck is very slow, so you want to deal with board threats a bit more than like with cards in hand. So I think 10 tribute monsters are fine. You could run something different for those 2 slots. You could even main deck 2 Vanity's Fiends, but if you main deck 2 Vanity's Fiends, then it's not that great if you play against a TG deck, for example. That's the thing about this format, it's very versatile. You could go up against a lot of random stuff. Then we play, of course, double Tragodia and Gorse. Thanks to Tribond Frog, this deck can't run that much defense. So we have to play some cards that survive, but at least do something with our board. So this deck is not running Battle Fader and only signing 1, because you don't want to draw multiple Battle Fader, and you have already enough tribute fodder, as you can see later with the spells. So Tragodia and Gorse are also a threat, which is Battle Fader is not. So I think that's enough, and you don't you're not that much in danger of getting OTK'd in this format. And even if some decks can do that, they still need a couple of turns to set up where you can draw into Tragodia and Gorse. And this deck also runs, of course, 3 copies of Maxi, best hand trap of this format. Especially with Tragodia, helps you draw into your protection card, or even outs for the next turn. Then we play off double Vela. As I said before, this deck can't run that much defense in terms of trap cards, so we have to play a bit more interruption. I'm not the biggest fan of running multiple copies of Vela, because in all formats hand traps are kinda nag. Maxi, for example, being the exception, because it at least replaced itself most of the time. So that's the monsters. Then we got for the spells 3 copies of Soul Exchange. This card is, besides enemy controller, one of the main ways for spells to get tribute fodder. It also is a removal, of course. It's still a very good card. The thing is that it's only good if you draw it with your tribute monsters. That's the kind of the problem of this deck, that you could have some awkward hands where you have multiple tribute monsters but no soul exchange, or you draw multiple soul exchange with like only frogs. I still think you need to run 3. It's like basically a worse Monarch Stormforth, which came out in 2014, and instantly power creep this card into oblivion. But we are in 2011, so we still have to run a normal spell where you even lose your battle phase. Then 3 enemy controller. This is of course in a format with pre-errata Treeborn Frog. So you could do plays like special standby phase, special summon your Treeborn Frog, then use enemy controller from your hand, tribute the Treeborn Frog, get a monster from your opponent, and then summon the Treeborn Frog back. That was possible. After the errata, you could not do that. So that is one of the main ways to abuse Treeborn Frog. So this is probably a deck which utilizes enemy controller probably the best, even better than plants. And in plants, this card is already great for certain synchro plays, or dealing with some board threats. And sometimes you could even run it. You can even activate it as just a straight defense card, but it's kind of a -1. But great versatility, great versatility with enemy controller. It's probably the best spell for this deck. The 2 copies of Part of Duality, not 3, because if you get access to your Treeborn Frog, you have to decide if you use your Part of Duality or if you want to get out the Treeborn Frog. So to prevent your hand from drawing multiple copies, you want to use only 2. This deck is if you compare that with Agents, where I only run 1 copy, this deck is a bit slower, so you end up being able to use this card in later games, and later turns, which is not the case in the Agent deck, for example. So I think it's a consistency card, so this deck doesn't have that much access to any searchable cards besides cards like Foolish Burial, which is a one-off, and the Swap Frog. Then 2 copies of MST. The top decks, which are Plants and Agents, don't use that much back row. So the 3rd copy is fine in the side deck. For back row decks, this deck has a lot of options to side against back row decks with cards like Jinzo, Mobius, or the 3rd Mystic Space Typhoon. And then we just play some staples. And in this deck you run, of course, the Foolish as well. So you get basically a 4th Swap Frog. Because getting Treeborn Frog is the most important thing in the first couple of turns. Then another card which is very interesting. I originally played this in a deck which me and a friend built in 2015, which was just kind of a rogue option back then, but it was a deck that utilized like the Darkness Dragon with Eclipse Wyvern and the Chaos Dragons, and also ran Solemn Scolding and Forbidden Chalice. So what you want to do is get out like the Darkness Dragon as fast as possible, and be able to get cards that could reset the attack of Light and Darkness Dragon, especially in a setting where people had trouble dealing with this. So this is great for resetting Light and Darkness Dragon, getting the effect in the damage step is useful as well. And what's relevant as well is that you not only could use this as kind of a third effect veiler, but also to boost your monarchs to 2/8 attack, which is quite relevant because cards like Chaos and Riser, or even Vanity's Fiend in some cases, are not able to get over a lot of problematic cards in this format. So this card helps you to boost your monarchs to run over a Stardust, a Master Hyperion, or even double with an Archlord Christia if that's a problem. But this card is like enemy controller, brings like an enemy controller great versatility, and I think that's fine as a one-off. I would prefer this over running a third copy of Vela. And as a single copy trap, run Treacherous Trap Hole. Here, this card could get MST'd, which is normally something that would be dead against Monarchs, but it can be a huge blowout card in certain matchups, especially the Planet matchup. And having some kind of interruption is kind of great, so it's important to so I think it's a great removal, and it's important to get your opponent from like using a Chaos or even a Trishula, so you could or not Trishula, that's wrong. You could chain it to something like a Chaos, so your Treatment Frog, just in case, is getting removed. So this was the main deck. Now we get to the extra deck, which is not that relevant with this deck. So you just run one copy of Chimera Attack. This deck side deck Cyber Dragons, but you have a lot of space in the extra deck, so you can run this without any problem. Then 2 copy of Gachi Gachi. The attack boost is still like in the Forbidden Chalice example very important, and it's a wall that can stall out games for you because you want the game to go very long, so you can go into those slow grindy games, and with your Ronin Totem you have easy access to it. So thanks to the extra deck, thanks to Monarchs not using the extra deck a lot, you have a lot of space, so you can run to. It came up some couple of games. And Formula and Armory Arm. Formula is probably the synchro you summon the most, with your Treeborn Frog and your Rayla if you want to go for a draw. And Armory Arm as your level 4. So most of the synchros are just to cover your pool because you play enemy controller. And Monster Reborn, and 1 Catastone, Hyper Librarian, so the best level 5s. 1 Brianek and 1 Gaia. No Orient Dragon because the attack boost can be, or having a higher attacker can be more relevant, because you don't have that much problem with removing cards from the field, so I just wanted to cover something, a different problem. And the thing also is, if you go for a level 6 synchro with this deck, you're most of the time not in a great spot, so just having the attack power could get you out of some situations. And we play Black Rose. Making 7s with this deck is a bit easier, but besides Black Rose, there are most generic level 7s are not that great. So I run Ancient Sacred Wyvern because I play Light Tuner with Effect Veiler. You could also run Ancient Fairy Dragon, but I prefer the Ancient Sacred Wyvern. You almost go into no synchros, so you have the option to cover some very specific situations, but you couldn't run like a card like Scrap Archfiend or Ancient Fairy Dragon. And for the 8s, 1 Stardust, 1 Scrap Dragon, so the best level 8s. 1 Trishula. I went into this a couple of times, so you just need to get a level 7 and then normal some Bela if you have the Tribune Frog, access to Tribune Frog, and then you can just go into Trishula. And of course, or a level 2 tuner like Earth, for example, with Tribune Frog and a Monarch would get you the same result. And then of course a level 10 would allow you Justice Decisive Armor, which is an instant win button against decks like Agent or even Rogue decks like Lightsworn. So you have this to cover the level 10s. This was the deck profile. This deck is I wouldn't play this deck for tournaments for this format because it lacks a lot of things, like certain power plays. Your only power play is basically enemy controller, so there are way better options for control decks or for slow grindy decks. And it's still a fun deck if you want to pick it up, and if you just play with your friends, then it doesn't matter if you play a meta deck, because you want to play those old formats so you can rediscover your old favorite decks. This was the video. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys, and see you soon.